upbringing. "And where would you little people like to live?" he asked kindly. Gwendolen at once said that old Mrs. Sharp downstairs had offered to take them in. "She's been ever so kind to us," she explained. "We'd love to live with her." Mrs. Sharp had been very kind. She was a witch too. The printed sign in her parlour window said, "Certified Witch," and interested in Gwendolen. The mayor was a little dubious. Like all people who had no talent for witchcraft, he did not approve of those who had. He asked Cat how he felt about Gwendolen's plan. Cat did not mind. He preferred living in the house he was used to, even if it was downstairs. Since the mayor felt that the two orphans ought to be made as happy as possible, he agreed. Gwendolen and Cat moved in with Mrs. Sharp. Looking back on it, Cat supposed that it was from this time on that he was certain Gwendolen was a witch. He had not been sure before. When he had asked his parents, they had shaken their heads, sighed, and looked unhappy. Cat had been puzzled, because he remembered the terrible trouble there had been when Gwendolen gave him cramps. He could not see how his parents could blame Gwendolen for it unless she truly was a witch. But all that was changed now. Mrs. Sharp made no secret of it. "You've a real talent for magic, dearie," she said, beaming at Gwendolen, "and I wouldn't be doing my duty by you if I let it go to waste. We must see about a teacher for you right away. You could do worse than go to Mr. Nostrum next door for a start. He may be the worst necromancer in town, but he knows how to teach. He'll give you a good grounding, my love." Mr. Nostrum's charges for teaching magic turned out to be £1 an hour for the elementary grades and £1 an hour for the advanced grades beyond. Rather expensive, as Mrs. Sharp said. She put on her best hat with black beads and ran around to the town hall to see if the fund would pay for Gwendolen's lessons. To her annoyance, the mayor refused. He told Mrs. Sharp that witchcraft was not part of an ordinary education. Mrs. Sharp came back, rattling the beads on her hat with irritation, and carrying a flat cardboard box the mayor had given her, full of the odds and ends the kind ladies had cleared out of Gwendolen's parents' bedroom. "Blind prejudice," Mrs. Sharp said, dumping the box on the kitchen table. "If a person has a gift, they have a right to have it developed, and so I told him. But don't worry, dearie," she said, seeing that Gwendolen was looking decidedly stormy. "There's a way around everything. Mr. Nostrum would teach you for nothing if we found the right thing to tempt him with. Let's have a look in this box. Your poor Ma and Pa may have left something that might be just the thing." Accordingly, Mrs. Sharp turned the box out onto the table. It was a queer collection of things, letters and lace and souvenirs. Cat did not remember having seen half of them before. There was a marriage certificate, saying that Francis John Chant had married Caroline Mary Chant 12 years ago at St. Margaret's Church, Wolvercote, and a withered nosegay his mother must have carried at the wedding. Underneath that, he found some glittery earrings he had never seen his mother wear. Mrs. Sharp's hat rattled as she bent swiftly over these. "Those are diamond earrings," she said. "Your Ma must have had money. Now, if I took those to Mr. Nostrum... But we'd get more for them if I took them round to Mr. Larkins." Mr. Larkins kept the junk shop on the corner of the street, except that it was not always exactly junk. Among the brass fenders and chipped crockery you could find quite valuable things, and also a discreet notice saying "exotic supplies," which meant that Mr. Larkins also stocked bats' wings, dried newts, and other ingredients of magic. There was no question that Mr. Larkins would be very interested in a pair of diamond earrings. Mrs. Sharp's eyes pouched up, greedy and beady, as she put out her hand to pick up the earrings. Gwendolen put out her hand for them at the same moment. She did not say anything. Neither did Mrs. Sharp. Both their hands stood still in the air. There was a feeling of fierce, invisible struggle. Then Mrs. Sharp took her hand away. "Thank you," Gwendolen said coldly. and put the earrings away in the pocket of her black dress. "You see what I mean?" Mrs. Sharp said, making the best of it. "You have a real talent, dearie." She went back to sorting the other things in the box. She turned over an old pipe, ribbons, a spray of white heather, menus, concert tickets, and picked up a bundle of old letters. She ran her thumb down the edge of it. "Love letters," she said. "His to her." She put the bundle down without looking at it, and picked up another. "Hers to him. No use." Cat, watching Mrs. Sharp's broad mauve thumb whirring down a third bundle of letters, thought that being a witch must save a great deal of time. "Business letters," said Mrs. Sharp. Her thumb paused and went slowly back up the pile again. "Now what have we here?" she said. She untied the pink tape from around the bundle and carefully took out 3 letters. She unfolded them. "Chrestomanci!" she exclaimed, and as soon as she said it, she clapped one hand over her mouth and mumbled behind it. Her face was red. Cat could see she was surprised, frightened, and greedy, all at the same time. "Now what was he doing writing to your pa?" she said, as soon as she had recovered. "Let's see," said Gwendolen. Mrs. Sharp spread the 3 letters out on the kitchen table, and Gwendolen and Cat bent over them. The first thing that struck Cat was the energy of the signature on all 3. Chrestomanci. The next thing he saw was that 2 of the letters were written in the same energetic writing as the signature. The first was dated 12 years ago, soon after his parents had been married. It said, "Dear Frank, now don't get on your high horse. I only offered because I thought it might help. I still will help, in any way I can, if you let me know what I can do. I feel you have a claim on me. Yours ever, Chrestomanci." The second letter was shorter. "Dear Chant, the same to you. Go to blazes. Chrestomanci." The third letter was dated 6 years ago, and it was written by someone else. Chrestomanci had only signed it. "Sir, you were warned 6 years ago that something like what you relate might come to pass, and you made it quite clear that you wished for no help from this quarter. We are not interested in your troubles, nor is this a charitable institution. Chrestomanci." "What did your pa say to him?" Mrs. Sharp wondered, curious and awestruck. "Well, what do you think, dearie?" Gwendolen held her hands spread out above the letters, rather as if she was warming them at a fire. Both her little fingers twitched. "I don't know. They feel important, especially the first one and the last one. Awfully important." "Who's Chrestomanci?" Cat asked. It was a hard name to say. He said it in pieces, trying to remember the way Mrs. Sharp had said it. Chrestomanci. "Is that the right way?" "Yes, that's right. And never you mind who he is, my love," said Mrs. Sharp. "And important's a weak word for it, dearie. I wish I knew what your pa had said. Something not many people would dare say by the sound of it. And look what he got in return. 3 genuine signatures. Mr. Nostrum would give his eyes for those, dearie. Oh, you're in luck. He'll teach you for those, all right. So would any necromancer in the country." Gleefully, Mrs. Sharp began packing the things away in the box again. "What have we here?" A little red book of matches had fallen out of the bundle of business letters. Mrs. Sharp took it up carefully, and, quite as carefully, opened it. It was less than half full of flimsy cardboard matches, but 3 of the matches had been burned without being torn out of the book first. The third one along was so very burned that Cat supposed it must have set light to the other 2. Said Mrs. Sharp. "I think you'd better keep this, dearie." She passed the little red book to Gwendolen, who put it in the pocket of her dress, along with the earrings. "And what about you having this, my love? Mrs. Sharp said.